Hello friends, and welcome to the second installment of my videos where I critique first pages sent to me by my viewers. If you're new here and you want to make sure that you get a notice next time I do a call for submissions for these videos, make sure to join either my Patreon or my Substack. That's generally where I'm sending out like the first notice of when I do the first page critiques. So anyway, that's a good place to find out about when I do these next. One of my cats has a cold, so if you hear a lot of tiny sneezing in the background, that's what's going on there. As with the last one, all these submissions are anonymous, and sometimes people tell me the genre, but often I don't really know where it's going, or what country they're from, or what age group things are intended for, etc. So just critiquing them based on the writing, but you really can tell a lot from a first page. And if you are a reader or an agent or an editor, the first page is where you're going to make a lot of judgments on the writing style, the pacing, the sense of where the story is going. And I try to be gentle, but I also try to be honest. So some people will get a harsher critique than others. I hope that I'm not too rough on anybody, but I also don't want to, BS you about anything, because I don't really know where anyone's at in their journey as far as like if they're at a stage where they're ready for a lot of critique or if they're just kind of fragile baby author. If you submit to one of these, I just kind of have to guess that you're ready for honesty. My name is Lydia Foxglove, and I have made my living as an author since 2009 for the most part. Always somewhere in the fantasy sphere, and I've been both traditionally published and had an agent, as well as had a successful indie publishing career. I've done a lot of critiques, and I've worked with several different professional editors. I've had some other published authors as critique partners, so, I've been around. If you're wondering what my credentials are to offer feedback today. Okay, here is the first sample. Her advisor's office was near the elevator, and normally Greer liked to imagine all the possibilities that a chance encounter on a lift might bring. Friends reuniting, lovers embracing, enemies igniting. Her own life had changed more than once, all because of such encounters. But today all she cared about was getting this meeting over with. These days she avoided campus when she could. So my first impression with this first paragraph is that it's fine. And that's generally my thought about this entire selection, is that it's fine. The writing is good. I didn't have a lot of notes on it. The thing that I'm not sure is what is my reason for reading on? This first paragraph does imply that there are other things, bigger things out there. We know that her life has changed more than once because of random encounters. So I would guess that that is going to play into it shortly. And I wonder if there's a way to amp this up a little bit as far as hinting at something more exciting happening. But let's keep looking at the rest. Greer sighed and pulled out her phone. Dr. Felding was late as usual. He'd be full of polite, apologetic noises, no doubt, despite being the one to set the meeting. She was tempted to reschedule. It would be easy enough to send a quick email. But that was just one of the many unsaid rules in a place like this. While a supervisor might cancel a meeting 5 minutes before it was scheduled to start, a lowly PhD student like Greer would need to be near death before daring to do the same. Another paragraph that is fine. The writing is good. This is the kind of thing where the writing doesn't feel overly wordy, but I'm just not sure if you need all this on the first page. It's relatable, to be sure. It just doesn't feel it almost feels a little too much like real life, like just normal real life stuff going on. So something like this, the question really is, what is the pitch? Because an agent, an editor, and a reader are all going to have some kind of pitch or blurb to let them know what's coming after this. And the other question is all of this just set up before something really exciting drops on page 2? It's not necessarily a deal breaker, to have the first page be a little boring, because sometimes you want that contrast of like, here's regular life and then something's about to happen. But if you're going to have circumstances that feel this mundane, you definitely do need to have something about to really shake up the scene. If that is not the case, then the question is either, can you start the story in a different place, or is there just a way to punch up the scene? Sometimes all you need is that the details to be more vivid, or to get into the character's interior space a little. What are they thinking? To kind of hint at tension in their mental state. So those are some options. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because, again, it doesn't really need much in the way of actual line editing. I am just not really sure where it's going or what would compel me to keep reading. Okay, so here's the next sample. The author noted that it is a enemies to lovers romantasy, and let's take a look. Asray, I'm guessing slightly on pronunciations, but Asray arrived at the frosted city square. I wonder if frosted the best word, maybe like frost covered. Frosted sounds more like a cookie. City Square, just as the nearby church rang its bell, signaling the end of morning prayers and the start of the business day. She wove past the busy merchants to her usual space between the church and the local tailor. She tethered her donkey to the nearby hitching post and unloaded the small rickety table that was folded against the side of the wagon. You can kill that was. This is one of the that was and there was. You can often just delete and it doesn't change anything. After propping it on the smoothest patch of cobblestones, she began laying out her homemade tea blends and canned goods and set her partner Kahanaro's pots and kettles on the floor in front of the table. I feel like you're already missing some opportunities to make the description a little more vivid, and this is like a last pass kind of thing. It's not like something you'd necessarily do in the first draft. But I feel like fantasy like this is punched up so much. If you just have a few details that feel unique, what kind of tea maybe, a little more about what the city square looks like with the frost, what kind of people are there, like does she know anybody, does she say hello to anyone that she bumps into regularly, just something to give it a little bit of like more flavor, because a lot of these fantasy openings just feel like they are all the same sort of genera fantasy world when they open up, and a lot of what allows you to shake off that sense is just giving some little vivid details that really ground it in like a particular space. The girl wore a lavender and ivory patterned dress. You could just cut that. Much is another word that tends to pop up and just kind of not really adds that much to a sentence. The girl wore a lavender and ivory patterned dress, too thin for the weather, and carried a worn-looking sack slung over her shoulder. You probably don't need to say carried and slung over her shoulder. You could just say she carried it. And then you've already established the girl, so you could say she stumbled as a man twice her size bumped into her and walked past without a word. The girl began to retrieve her coin pouch. You could just say that. And you could also just say with slightly shaky hands, because fumbling and slightly shaking hands kind of convey the whole thing, or the same thing. As she dug around, an apple came spilling out and rolled underneath the table, landing between the woman's feet. The woman looked agitatedly at the girl before slowly, stiffly bending down to pick up the apple. I feel like you could just say that she looked like aggravated rather than agitatedly at the girl, and you could just say before stiffly, like no one's going to do something stiffly that isn't also slowly. Then you tighten that up. The instant the woman's eyes lowered towards the ground, the girl's hands darted towards the pies. Azuri stared, her mouth agape, as the girl stacked 2 pies onto her hand in a mere moment, then stuffed them into her bag with deft efficiency. You could probably just say Azuri stared, mouth agape, as the girl stacked 2 pies onto her hand, then stuffed them into her bag. Because you've got, by saying with deft efficiency, that conveys the within a mere moment part already. Basically, you have a lot of words and bits of phrasing that say the same thing that you already said, and those just kind of add up and give the manuscript a little sense of being bogged down or not flowing quite as well as it could. So that's something to definitely watch out for when you're doing line edits. Just like here, you could cut this. The woman having retrieved the apple, you can cut that. The woman straightened up and extended her hand towards the girl, handing it back to her. The girl accepted it graciously. This is kind of a lot of words, again, for something fairly simple. You could just say, straightened up and offered the apple. Like, we know she bent down to get the apple, so we don't kind of need all these words to convey every little action of the apple. Those are about all the line edits I have for this one. It definitely, for the most part, just needs like some tidying up of repetitive phrasing. The writing is pretty good overall. I do feel like I might connect to it better if I got a few more interior thoughts from Azrae, but that is a matter of personal taste, and I would just like to see more vivid description, because it kind of feels to me like nothing that thrilling has happened here. There are no stakes. All that we've seen is that there is a strange girl who stole two pies. That's not like, okay, well, that's too bad, but we haven't seen anything about this girl that's like, oh my gosh, what is her deal? She sounds fairly generic as a character. All we've got is that she's alone, she's wearing simple clothes, she's got a pack, she looks uneasy, she stole some stuff. There's nothing about her that makes me go, oh my, wow, what is going on with this girl? I've got to read on. And similarly, we haven't really gotten anything about the main character that says, I have to read on. What is going to happen? So if there's any way to hint at some kind of reason to keep reading, I'm sure there is one as we go, but you really want to hint at that on the first page. And sometimes all it takes is little details that imply this is a cool world that you want to spend time in. All right, so here is our next submission, which as I read, it felt like it's like an action fantasy, and generally I felt like it worked. But I'm going to read the first paragraph or so just to give you guys an idea of the flavor and give a couple thoughts. How you holding up back there, Marshall? You don't want me to answer that right now. Russell, the appointed marshal of Connemara, I don't know, couldn't hear Josh's laughter, but he could feel it shaking the cowboy's lean frame where his arms were wrapped around the man's waist. Before Russell could voice his annoyance, the mare they were riding suddenly changed course, tucking her wings in tight to make a dizzying sideways drop. When she snapped them back open, they swept over an arroyo. I don't know if I know how to say arroyo correctly. Then up over the rocky sides. So my main thought with this first paragraph is when I was first reading it, I was a little like spatially disoriented here, and I think I might just like move that and maybe just cut this. I mean, I feel like you could almost cut it and work their names in elsewhere. Just because when I read that first sentence, it just feels a little like, before I know that they're writing this Pegasus creature, I'm like, what scene am I in? But most of this is they're flying on this Pegasus and they land, catching a whiff of blood as the mare settled into a sitting position. Russell leaned sideways to look around Josh. The phrasing of this made me think for a moment that the smell was coming from the mare. The way this is structured makes me feel like they're connected somehow, so I might tweak that sentence a little bit. But I don't have a whole lot of critique of this. It feels very heavy on like the action of the flight, and that there's this probably is going to be a fairly action-packed book, which isn't my personal favorite kind of story. I'm more of like a character, court, political intrigue, romance, friendship, rather than like a lot of action scenes. But I feel like for an action fantasy, it's working pretty well for me, and I just have like a few little typos, but I'm not going to bother talking about those on the video. Those are pretty easy to catch with, Grammarly or getting a friend to read it through. I feel like there's a sense of like there could be a fun relationship between the two characters, and it seems like kind of a Western with fantasy elements. So you've set up, like, you know, there's things happening, there's a sense of motion, and that would be enough to probably get me to read the second page. So not a whole lot of notes on this one. Here is the next submission. Gran Muela braided flowers in my hair. A stray bloom sometimes tumbled from her slow, shaky hands. She said, "Your braid reaches your elbows now." She was my mother's mother, but in my eyes she seemed as old as the hills, as old as magic. "You decide what to do," she said. "Nobody gets to decide that except you." "Of course, I'll do whatever I want," I said nonchalantly. I vastly overestimated how much freedom adulthood would bring me. Gran Muela held a hand mirror behind my head. Marigolds dotted my dark hair like little suns. Okay, so I feel like this is a pretty good submission, and I wanted to highlight a few things that it does well. This first paragraph immediately conveys a sense that the writer has studied their craft and has some confidence in it. This is paced with the confidence to just give this idle line of description here, and the prose has a very nice cadence. Then we get a little bit of, you know, rooting us in the place, in the culture, in the second paragraph. And then we have a hint of, there's some tension with the mother, and Gran Muela is more of an ally to the main character. And we get a hint of tension here. We now know that adulthood is not going to give this character what she was hoping for. And then I also really like this descriptive passage, "Marigolds dotted my dark hair like little suns." A lot of the submissions I've gotten both in this video and the last video and in my entire history critiquing pages, a lot of times people will just say something like, "The flowers look beautiful in my braid." If you can punch it up a little and describe marigolds dotting hair like little suns, it really gives it more of a sense that you know what you're doing with your prose. Now, I will say, as far as building tension with a sentence like this, I vastly overestimated how much freedom adulthood would bring me. This is thanks to the point of view, which we have a first-person point of view, and apparently we've gone back. We're kind of establishing the childhood of the main character, and I can assume there's going to be a time jump forward to adulthood coming fairly early in the novel. And telling a story that's framed that way, where it starts off describing childhood, but with the knowledge of what will come in advance, allows you a big advantage as far as being able to sprinkle tension by implying how things are going to turn out, without actually saying what's going to happen. However, not every story can be told in this structure, but if you do use this structure, that's like a little advantage that you get. And then the main character gets a baby dragon, which I'm always a fan of a baby dragon. I really don't have a lot to critique about this. I had made a few like really tiny line edits, but they're pretty small. And I think just for the sake of moving on with this video, I'm just going to say this was a good submission. The next submission starts off, "He would come to her in her dreams, causing her to toss and turn fitfully all night, her light brown hair splayed across the pillow. It was always the same dream, him jumping out at her from behind a jagged tree in a dark forest. Who was he, this young man dressed in a torn shirt, his dark hair hanging over his brown eyes that were wide with fear?" I would probably just cut this part. It feels a little extraneous. We already know that she's tossing and turning. Her hair is going to get splayed. Sometimes those are nice details, but I don't feel like this is like a really juicy detail. And you describe his hair in the same passage, so it kind of makes it seem like just too much hair for the first paragraph. Even in her sleep, something about the boy seemed familiar, and yet she did not recognize him. Now he called her name, Lily. His mouth was moving, forming the word, yet no sound was coming from his pale lips. How did he know her name, and what did he want from her? Legs pumping, now he sprinted down the long row of trees between them, but he never seemed to get any closer. Okay, I would trim this up a little. This was moving, was coming. This is passive voice, and it kind of bogs things down. So you could just say, his mouth formed the word, yet no sound came from his pale lips. How did he know her name? I would also probably just kill legs pumping, because if you're sprinting, then your legs are moving. Pushing her hair out of her face, Lily sat up in bed and rubbed her face. This is just too many actions. You don't need to describe that she pushed her hair out of her face, that we already know she's in bed. We could just say she sat up and rubbed her face. That gets across that like, oh, morning kind of vibe. Why do I keep having this dream night after night? A glance at the alarm clock. Don't we already know that it's 4:30 a.m. because you've already established that it is? Told her she had no time to sit and speculate. She needed to get a move on. And you could probably just kill that, because you already conveyed that it's early, but then this next thing she's already telling her friend, time to get up, got to get going if we're going to make our flight. And as the passage continues, there's still kind of just like a few too many actions, just making you don't really need to describe every little movement the characters make. The reader can fill in. Like, she threw back the covers, she threw her long legs over the side of the bed and ruffled her curly red hair. We're getting a lot of hair description, by the way. I would like to see a little more unique description than just what colors of hair everyone has. In fact, here you have Lily shampooing her light brown hair and thinking about her haircut. There is a lot of hair for the first page. The page ends with the fact that Lily is going on a trip with her best friend. She's very excited about it, but she just has a sense of dread, and she's wondering if it has something to do with the dream. So we've got some tension building here. Structurally, this works. Most of the writing is pretty good. I just want to see some tightening up of like meaningless little actions, keeping an eye out for use of passive voice, like was moving, was going to, things like that. My general thought with this is that if this has a good description that people like, this is like good indie published quality. Now, if it was going to a publisher, like an actual agent, it feels a little familiar as far as like a slush pile submission. There's nothing in it that really jumps out as being like, oh wow, I've never quite seen anything like this, or this author has a really fresh voice. So if you're aiming for traditional publishing, I think I would really work on punching up the voice, giving the characters some more intriguing descriptions, and maybe hinting at something a little more unique happening. If it's indie publishing and it has a good hook, then it just needs like a little bit of line editing and probably good to go. Indie readers tend to be voracious readers, and they're not nitpicking your prose. They read a lot. They just want a good story. Agents and editors, on the other hand, will be spending a lot of time with the book, so they really have to love it. You have to get past them first, and you have to give them something that feels really special. So when I say things in these videos like this is indie quality, it's not traditional quality, part of that isn't even the indie quality is necessarily bad. It's just that agents and editors get bored of the same old thing, because the amount of time that they will spend with your book is so much more than anyone in indie publishing will spend with it unless you're paying them. Okay, so I've already done a couple of critiques for this author through my telepath tier critique, which if you're curious about having a personal critique from me, that is a private video I send to you. It's usually anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on what your first page looks like, and it also helps to support the channel. If you go to my Patreon, you can sign up for it, and then your pages will not be discussed on YouTube, and you'll also get a really in-depth critique compared to what I do here. But I've already critiqued the first page of the prologue as well as the first chapter, and so this time the author sent me the first page of chapter 4, so I expect to be a little bit lost, and I don't normally recommend that any of you send me the first page of a middle chapter, but it's a good time to comment on what a middle chapter should look like. What were you thinking? Adariye demanded an answer. She did not hear me the last time. I wanted to get her attention. I thought. Elorella slumped her shoulders. That is where you went wrong. You thought. Adariye's tone sharpened. We cannot be visible to humans. You know it's against the rules. Wait, when did the rules change? Lyra injected herself into the conversation. I remember that man. Do not talk about the man. Elorella clasped her hands over her ears. I never want to think about that man again. Okay, so at this point in a chapter, I should know whose point of view we're in, and I don't know whose point of view we're in, because no one is having any interior thoughts. And that kind of continues throughout this submission, that I really don't know whose point of view this writing takes place in. It just feels like the script of a play with set directions, like how is the actor supposed to speak the line and how is their body supposed to move. Or it feels like some authors do a first draft where they just do dialogue only and then like those kind of set direction type things like slumped her shoulders, and they don't add in description and they don't add in character interior thoughts and they don't add in any like background world building. That's what this feels like. It just feels like it's missing both the description as well as the interior thoughts of any of the characters. If I pick a book up off of my to-be-read pile, a book I've never read before, and I flip to chapter 4, chances are that I probably won't really know what's going on, but nevertheless, the writer will start to ground me in the character's thoughts and in the setting of the book. So just throughout this passage, probably throughout the entire book, this really just needs more. It just feels like a first draft that is lacking a sense of who is the main character, what are they thinking, what are they afraid of, what are they hoping for, who do they care about, and also where are we, what does it look like? What is the feeling that the main character is getting from the other characters and their interactions? There's so much going on, but I'm just kind of lost throughout this whole passage because I'm not getting any of the information. I'm not grounded in any of the characters. So it needs some work in that regard. And that is something that when I get to the next month's video and I talk about books that are already published, I'm going to be pointing out some of these things to you guys as far as what it looks like in a published book that is already well loved by many readers. What is it about them that's inviting the reader into that world? Okay, so this submission, the author noted that it is a cozy mystery, and that even though I don't read a lot of mysteries, as I have said, they are still curious to know what I think. And it is true. I don't read a lot of mysteries. But writing is writing, and this one starts off with a writer, apparently Stock. Jonah was staring at a blank Word document, trying to come up with something to write, yet nothing was coming to mind. It was times like this that made him question why he had wanted to become a mystery writer. But Jonah reminded himself of the feeling he got when the words flowed out of him, pure ecstasy. Unfortunately, that feeling had escaped him for a while now. This was a problem, considering he was supposed to release a new book for the summer, and time was running out. Jonah reasoned he needed a spark of inspiration, but the problem was that inspiration took a lot of work to find when looking for it. He needed something to distract his mind and refresh his creative juices, but the question was, what? I don't know where you're going with this, but I feel like it would be so much tighter if you were in a little bit of a closer point of view. And what I mean by that is this definitely feels like you, the writer, telling us about Jonah and telling us what Jonah is thinking and feeling. You could pull in a little closer. This is also that was staring construction again. That just bogs things down. Jonah stared at a blank Word document, trying to come up with something to write. Yet nothing was coming to mind. You probably could just say something like Jonah's mind was as blank as his Word document. Then here's how you can pull a little closer. Times like this, he questioned, you know what, you could even cut that. Just say, why had he ever wanted to become a mystery writer again? Yet the feeling when the words flowed out of him, pure ecstasy. He's supposed to release a new book for the summer. Later it notes that he has an agent, so I assume he's traditionally published. So I just want to note that usually the lead time on traditional publishing is at least a year. So this book should be like next summer to be even remotely realistic for traditional publishing. So let's just change that to next summer. And then you could cut this. Jonah reasoned so just Jonah needed a spark of inspiration. Actually, you don't have to say Jonah again, because like who else would it be at this point in the book? He needed a spark of inspiration, but inspiration took a lot of work. Maybe something more like inspiration never showed up on demand. Okay, so that's quite a bit shorter and just feels a little tighter and less like the author is like, Jonah reasoned, Jonah was feeling. Just then, Jonah heard his phone ring. He said a silent prayer that it wasn't his agent calling for an update on the book again when he went to pull it out of his pocket. Curiosity covered his face when he saw that Victoria Turner was calling him. He wondered why his godmother was calling him when he answered the phone and said, "Good afternoon, Victoria. I'm surprised you're calling me. It's been ages since I've seen you. How have you been?" Okay, let me just hack into this. Okay, so you almost never need to say just then. You can just let things happen. You also don't need to have people hear their phones ring. You can just say, Jonah's phone rang. And the author or the reader will know that Jonah heard the phone ringing. He said a silent prayer that it wasn't his agent when he went to pull it out of his pocket. We don't need that either. We can just assume that wherever the phone is, he's picking it up. Curiosity covered his face when he saw, and you kind of have repetitive, Victoria Turner was calling him. Why is his godmother calling him? I'm surprised you're calling me. This all kind of conveys the same thing. So I would just say, you could get more in his head and be like, his godmother. That was unusual. Then you can have him just answer it. Now, this seems like such a weird way to answer the phone. Very formal and like a little weird to say, I'm surprised you're calling me. People usually say something more like, what a surprise. This almost feels a little rude, which unless you're implying that Jonah is a little rude, but that wasn't the vibe that I got. Victoria laughed as she said, "Good afternoon, Jonah. It has been too long since I've seen you. I've not been doing well, and that's why I'm calling." You could cut since I've seen you. That's kind of repetitive too. I also wonder why is she laughing? Because what she's about to say is not very funny. I'm sorry to hear that, Victoria. What's been causing you trouble? Well, that's the thing. This might sound crazy, but I suspect someone is trying to poison me. I hoped you could help me since you're a famous mystery author. Not to sound patronizing, but can you tell me why you think someone is trying to poison you? This is repetitive. He couldn't believe his ears. He found it hard to believe. I almost feel like you don't even need any of this. And I kind of wonder, would a real person, I feel like if you were a mystery author, you would almost be kind of like, well, I just write books, right? Like you might want to call the police. I feel like you have a chance to have a little bit of like an entertaining back and forth here of a more perhaps realistic reaction to someone telling you this. So Victoria says, "Certainly, darling. For the last few days I've been experiencing bad stomach cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea, which are all symptoms of arsenic poisoning." She's done her research, I guess. "I think one of my children who lives with me on my private island is behind all this. They are all leeches," spat out before continuing. "I wouldn't be surprised if any of them might want to try to get rid of me for my money, since I own millions of dollars from my wine empire, Turner Wine." I just don't quite buy a lot of this, I'm sorry to say. Stomach cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea for a few days. Just sounds like it could be food poisoning. Did she go to the doctor? That would be like my first question here, rather than, I don't know if he says that on page 2, but I feel like I'd be interrupting, like, have you been to the doctor? And it also seems like she's telling him things that he ought to already know, like, She's his godmother, implying there was at some point some kind of close relationship between this woman and his parents, but he doesn't even know that her children live with her on her private island. I don't even think she needs to say that she has a private island. He probably would know that already, and surely he would know that she owns a wine empire. So it's giving me like I'm playing a video game and the character is just showing up to give me some very obvious clues so that I can later select that in a menu box to see if I remember the details. Like, oh, her wine company, was it Turner Wine? Was it Island Wine? Or was it... Anyway, that might work for a game. I feel like this just doesn't feel like very realistic dialogue for a man and his godmother that he hasn't spoken to in a while. Why don't they speak? Is there any preamble? Is he just kind of like, wait a minute, I'm already stuck on my novel. I'm not a detective. It's a weird interaction. So I would try to see if you could go in there and make it a little more natural, perhaps. And here is the last submission of this video. A gust of wind blew up the dust in the baseball field, coating the sides of the skates in a new layer of dirt. Oliver sunk his fingers between the holes in the fence, not minding the rusty metal for once in his life. He squinted, trying to read the label. Impala, Ben said, adjusting his glasses. That's the brand. Sounds fancy, Timmy chortled. It was already a week into summer break and he still had his backpack on. I don't get it though. Why leave roller skates in a baseball field? Okay, so the opening of this, the way this is described, I was a little confused. I thought that maybe Oliver was wearing the skates, and then it wasn't until the third paragraph that I realized he's squinting through a fence at some skates that have been abandoned in the dirt of the baseball field. So I might want to clarify that. The abandoned skates. I don't know, something just to kind of hint, place us where are the skates versus where is this character and the other characters in all of this. And we also have the that was that you can almost always cut. So there's abandoned skates and there's a flyer for a skating competition with an entrance fee of $25. And then we get some dialogue with his friends. Hey, give me that. Oliver waited for his friend to read it. When he was done, Timmy crumpled up the poster and tossed it into the wind. Boring. Hey, don't do that. What, you're going to be on me about littering? It's not that stupid. I might want to join, you know. Then his friends are laughing. Dude, do you even know how to skate? And $25, you don't have $3 to your name. Okay, so my first thoughts with this is, for one thing, no one really has a lot of interior thoughts here. Oliver is not thinking anything. He waits for his friend to read it. He runs and catches the rolling wad of paper. We don't get any of his thoughts, and I feel like his friends are making fun of him. We should feel like if these are like middle school boys or something, there ought to be an interior sense of visceral embarrassment and defensiveness that he's into roller skating. It's not really cool. He's not really going to be good at it. He doesn't even own skates. My second thought is that I wonder who the audience is for this. It feels like their dialogue feels very kind of like 1980s, like after school special or, you know, cartoon dialogue. It doesn't really feel like, I don't really buy that this is real modern boys talking. Which made me think, is this set in the 80s? Is it supposed to be kind of like a throwback story? But then I'm thinking it's not, because the entrance fee for the roller skating competition is a whopping $25, which seems like a lot even for nowadays. But that is a definite indicator to me that this is not set in the 80s. So I'm not sure, like, ultimately, is this going in some kind of like parody of like an 80s vibe? Is it going to, you know, take a real turn? If it's just a straightforward story about a boy who wants to roller skate, even though he's not very good at it, and even though roller skating isn't very popular anymore, then I think that you really have to convey all those factors in the dialogue and interior thoughts. Like if you go back to old Beverly Cleary novels, even to this day, she was such a master of capturing like childhood emotion and like the embarrassment, just like the awkward cringiness of wanting something, not knowing how to get it, dealing with other kids. I feel like this could be that kind of story, but it just doesn't have that emotional depth to it yet. So those are my main thoughts with this piece. And that concludes my submissions for this video. Again, make sure to join my Patreon and Substack as a free member if you want to get notices when I call for submissions. Okay, so those are my critiques this month. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that everyone learned something from this batch. Next month, it is my plan to hopefully do a video where I go through some first pages or first chapters, perhaps, of some published successful books and talk about what makes them work. I think it's going to be a good idea to kind of alternate between like really successful examples, because sometimes I try to explain things and I'm like, I want to give you guys an example of what I mean when I refer to certain things. So that'll probably be next month. Health willing, if you follow my Patreon and Substack, you might know that I have had some health issues, just generally a very fatigued summer, dealing with like unexpectedly sock me in the brain perimenopause symptoms. And I also had food poisoning this past weekend. It was about as mild a case of food poisoning as you can get, but I do think that it was food poisoning because I ate some leftovers that I even asked Dade, like, these will be okay, right? You know, luckily it only really lasted for 2 days, and then we had a very nice dinner party anniversary we went to that weekend with delicious food. So thankfully, like, the timing didn't ruin my whole weekend, but yeah, it wasn't the best weekend. I've just had that kind of year where someone's always in ill health or the cats have had problems. And I'm starting to realize that I really just need to take it easy right now. But I'm trying my best to still stick to all my plans. Hope springs eternal. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. What's with the frog voice? Why do you always have a frog voice when you get down here?
Somehow, just to tie that all this together.